The next standard we're going to look at is the ASTM. In 2007, ASTM published the F2656-07 crash standard. Taking over the crash standard from the DOS, this new standard included the same test vehicle as specified in the 2003 Rev A standard. However, it also added additional test vehicles at the time, which were a small passenger car, half-ton pickup truck, and a tandem axle dump truck. F2656-07 was not without its issues, though. And I know I'm going to probably catch a little flack on this, but I like to call the 07 the T-ball standard, the T-ball of crash standards. You know, everyone's a winner and everyone gets a trophy. Let me explain. As you see on the screen, for the purpose of this presentation, I'm going to match the same vehicle with the DOS. So M indicates medium duty, 15,000 pound vehicle. And the numbers after that indicate the speed at which the vehicle is traveling. So M30 is consistent with the K4 in the Rev A, 15,000 pound vehicle moving at 30 miles an hour. And M40 is consistent with the K8, and M50 is consistent with the K12. That's, however, pretty much where the similarities end. Let's look at the penetration. The Rev A of the DOS had only L3, penetration of 1 meter or less from the truck bed. ASTM changed that indicator to an L, from an L rating to a P, P standing for penetration. The 2007 version of it's where it becomes a little interesting and why it should be renamed the T-ball standard. P1's equivalent to the L3. They matched. They were 1 meter or less from the bed. P2, though, changed it from went from 1 meters to 7 meters or 23 feet, where the L2 was 1 meter to 6 meters or 20 feet. And then P3 on the ASTM 07 version was 7 meters to 30 meters or 98 feet, where the L1 was only up to 50 feet. And that's all well and good. You can add that and change it, but that's a lot of penetration. But for those of you unfamiliar with how a crash test is conducted, the vehicle is drained of all fluids, the engine's not running, and it's pulled down a track on a pulley system. And right before it strikes the barrier, it's released. And the speed at the speed the manufacturer's testing to, whether it was 30 miles an hour, 40 or 50, plus or minus a couple miles an hour. Upon impact with the barrier, the vehicle's dynamic penetration, which is measured by the maximum horizontal penetration distance of the reference point of the test vehicle, as opposed to its static penetration or final resting point, is what it was measured on the penetration. I know that doesn't mean much. However, in other words, if your barrier used a giant rubber band and the vehicle hit it and it stretched 500 feet and then the vehicle bounced back 600 feet, your penetration is still 500 feet. So it's not where the final resting point was. So that brings us to our last penetration rating in the 07 standard, which was P4. P4 had a vehicle penetration of 30.01 meters or greater. Yep, everyone's a winner. Everyone gets a trophy. You can put a water bottle out there and run a car over it, and it goes out into a field and it's released and it stops in 500 feet, and you've got a certified M50 P4 barrier. Since the 07 standard, though, there have been 3 additional updates to the ASTM F2656 in 2015, 2018, and again in 2020. There were major changes in the 2015, and the first one was that the P4 penetration rating was removed, citing that it just didn't have a substantial relevance, which I can't argue with. They also added a couple of new vehicles, a full-size sedan at 4,600 pounds and a cab over class 7 at almost 16,000 pounds, which matches the IWA 14 or the European style truck. So they brought in a lot of what the IWA standard was into the ASTM. The next revision with the major changes was the one in 2020. it incorporated two major changes from the 15 and 18A version. The first and most significant was that all penetrations would now be measured from the leading edge of the barrier. So removing any question on the testing. So for instance, if you have a wedge barrier and it's an 8-foot front to back, from Rev A through 2018, the penetration was measured from the back of that barrier. So your bed started at the back of that barrier, so you had an extra 8 feet to do it. So they've moved that penetration point to the beginning. So now the crash test on 2020 starts, that bed starts right at the beginning of that barrier. Which, you know, when you're looking at a bollard, it's either 8, 10, or 12 inches around, you know, it only moves the penetration point 12 inches, 10 inches, or 8 inches as opposed to 8 feet. So it puts everybody on a little bit of a better playing field. It was really hard, and it's probably still going to be really hard for a bollard to get a M50P1 rating, just because of where they're measuring it from. And you're going to find a lot of wedge barriers that were M50P1 at this point are not going to be. The second change, it was determined that the previous bed attachment was deemed to be inadequate, so the number of shear plates was increased. I've personally seen this where a couple crash tests were run and the vehicle stopped dead, but the bed just sheared straight off and went flying over top of the truck. So they counted that as a P2 because it flew further than 1 meter.